Hello, everybody. It is Saturday night at 10 o'clock. I am Chris Weuve. This is Starfleet Tactical. I have with me, obviously, Chris Carlson. Thanks for coming on, Chris.
Pleased to be here as always.
Just out of curiosity, are you speaking for any employer?
Let me check. Am I speaking for myself? No.
You're not even speaking for yourself?
No.
Alex always says that he is speaking for his employer because he, of course, is his own employer. So let's see. Let me go ahead and put a banner up because let's go ahead and make that clear. So we almost, FYI, neither you nor Alyssa is here behind the scenes, everybody. Neither you nor Alyssa had heard that we kind of almost, hello, Alyssa, we kind of almost had a third person. And by that, I mean, I invited a third person on the show because I thought he was going to be available. But it turns out I put 2 and 2 together and got 22, and he wasn't actually available. And that's Nick Bradbeer. Do you know Nick, Kress?
Oh, yeah. I've talked to him online, but that's really about it.
Yeah, he said he works for David Manley, and he's a naval architect. He's a British naval architect who was here for the Connections Conference. And he sent a note saying he was supposed to fly out. I think he was supposed to fly out originally tonight, but for some reason he's going to spend the night in Raleigh, or he's flying out tomorrow from Raleigh, or at least North Carolina. And I said, "Oh, so can you be on the show? Do you want to be on the show?" Because he lives in the London area, and so I've invited him on the show, but it means that he gets up at like 3 o'clock in the morning in order to be on the show. So I haven't actually ever had him on the show. But I thought, if he's going to be in a hotel or something, but actually, even as we speak, his plane is probably doing the takeoff roll from New York, I think. So, but it would be interesting to have him on board also for our conversation. We assumed, so this is a question and answer show, everybody. But Chris and I assumed that we would probably get some questions about the submarine, since Chris and I both did submarine stuff in our previous lives. Now I work for somebody else that really doesn't care about submarines, but I spent a lot of time thinking about submarines in the past. I should note, Chris is a naval engineer. I am not, but I know a little bit of stuff here and there, in part because I talk to smart people like Chris. So everybody should be thinking about what questions they want to ask us about all the different naval stuff I've done over the course of the last few months, whether you want to talk about submarines or anything like that. So, but do you have any initial thoughts on on this Titanic submarine disaster, submersible disaster?
Well, you can't even say it was crushed like a beer can, because is not typically used things that are supposed to hold pressure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's some really questionable design decisions there. And as Chris has already heard me say once before, I found it somewhat, there's certainly a logical fallacy associated with the idea, at least in my mind, that he said that, if you look back on all the accident reports that people have with submersibles, it's never engineering issues. It's always some human error. It's always an operator issue that causes the problem, not the engineering issues. And that's why we're just going to ignore the engineering standards, and why we're not, or at least ignore engineering certification. Whereas I would look at that and say, like, okay, so yeah, you're right. The engineering certification stuff did its job and prevented people from having engineering problems. And so this is a case of, this is a case of like Donuts at one point during World War II told his submariners that if they are attacked by aircraft, they should stay on the surface and fight it out with the anti-aircraft guns that they had, because they had received no reports of that failing. To which my question is, give me the scenario where that fails and you get a report. Tell me how that works. So, so Bob asked the question. I'm going to pop it up on the screen. Given that it was in international waters, is there any agency that can actually regulate and enforce required safety procedures there? I think the answer to that question is no, not there, but you can enforce other things. Like, for instance, right now, submersibles are considered cargo when they come into a ship in port.
I actually have an answer to this.
You do?
Yes. So because it is in international waters, no. However, because it is a private company, they are beholden to the laws of the country the LLC is registered.
Yep. I was going to get there. But that's actually, I think that's a pretty good answer. The other one is that if it goes into port and it's cargo on board, I would think that they could do a safety inspection for the cargo.
There's one avenue in which there is an international group. If you want it insured,
yeah,
it's got to be certified by someone like Lloyd's Registry or Det Norske Veritas. And if you don't get it certified, anything happens, you have no insurance. Which is why most ships that sail around on the oceans get certified.
And it also seemed, well, and the other thing is that if you don't have insurance, you can't go into a port. I mean, that's the way that they've enforced a lot of the embargo on the Russians, is that Russian tankers can't go into ports because they can't get insurance because of the embargo. So there's definitely some ways that you could get to them, and I suspect that also the flag country, if the flag country passes a law that says we don't care how many pieces of paper they sign, you're still liable, even if you sign a piece of paper saying we acknowledge all the threats, et cetera, but if it's not certified, you're still liable, and you can still be sued.
And I was gonna try and take a look and see what the SOLAS regulations are for submersibles. I just never got around to it.
Yeah, I have no idea. So Wilhelm asks, how much does that insurance cost? I have no idea. I do know, though, that it's not just the insurance to operate the vessel, to operate the submersible, because I don't think that you get insurance for those. That's why you have those waivers. It's the insurance of everything else associated with it. Like if the ship can't get the insurance to just operate. So, but oh well. So Rob Davidoff asked the question, did everyone enjoy the switch from Hunt for October to Red Storm Rising? Which is pretty good. So yeah.
I laughed way too hard when I saw that one. I'm not going to lie.
Well, and the part that makes this even more fun is, as I've commented on the show previously, there was a war game associated with Red Storm Rising. They played the game Harpoon. Chris, do you know anything about Harpoon?
No. We did. If anyone wants to get an idea of what we did, Larry did most of it. I only participated in 3 of the 4 games. The Dawn of the Vampires thing that we sell is the after action report for all 3 Dance of the Vampire scenarios. And in the back is the Keflavik turkey shoot. Okay. And that pretty much covers what we did for Red Storm Rising.
So what role did you have in that game?
In one of them, I was the Red Air Commander because I was doing all the endurance calculations. Because we had that much fuel left, comrade. So I had to make sure the numbers were calculated correctly because it's really embarrassing to have backfires falling out of the sky.
I seem to recall at some point I figured out that I knew that the only person I didn't know in that game was Tom Clancy.
I wouldn't know if you, well, don't know if you know Sam Baker.
No, that name doesn't ring a bell.
Yeah.
But I knew Todd Cowderer. I knew you.
Yeah.
I knew Larry, and I want to say there was one or two others.
So yeah, that was those were pretty interesting. But as Larry likes to say, they did not take the outcomes directly; they just looked at the interactions, so that they could turn those into pros. They already knew the French carrier was going to get schwacked. I mean, that was already a done deal. It was just how to make it sound really ugly.
So let's see. I'm saying, all right. I'm looking at questions here. Right Sublet says, I'm definitely optimistic about the AUKUS Australia, UK, USN sub-program to help Australia step up to the big leagues for SSNs. Thoughts on sharing this technology? So one of the comments that the first thought that came to my mind is with there are 4 Collins class submarines, and the Australians were having a hard time keeping up sort of a high op tempo with them because they were having a hard time crewing all 4 submarines. And the nukes are definitely going to take larger crews, I would think. Unless they really went and did it the Australian way and had a lot more automation than we're comfortable with. How much automation did the Brits use? What are British submarine crews like compared to ours?
They're a little smaller. They had single person control a lot earlier than we did. I mean, there's only one guy at the helm. I mean, it's one stick.
Okay.
And that was on Triumph when I went to sea on her for a little bit. My understanding is Swiftsures are like that as well. So can't say about Astute. I don't think they moved away from that, but I don't know about the automation part. Part of the problem you have with automation is that submariners get really paranoid in that people don't just make for decent rotations on the watch schedule so you don't burn everybody out, but they're there to fight a casualty.
Yeah.
Because we ain't got no automatic damage control. It's all people based.
Jerry Purnell talked about that in Mote in God's Eye, where they have to have large crews for damage control, and so they don't automate. And on at least one ship where they did automate, the Rebel ship that they automated on, they were having a hard time keeping everybody busy because the ship was so heavily automated that they still had to have a large crew for damage control, but they were just sort of sitting around twiddling their thumbs, and that wasn't good for discipline. So it's, to some degree, we make a virtue out of necessity. And I know that it's a little bit different in the submarine force. I know in the surface force, when like we sold the Oliver Hazard Perrys to Australia, they sent them to sea with crews about half the size of what we sent, and half to 2/3. And that's because their manning policy was just different in terms of what they expected to be able to do at the same time. They basically resigned themselves to the fact that they were only going to have basically only the day shift could fight a war in all warfare areas at the same time.
They also gave up a lot of maintenance, day-to-day maintenance.
And they just did it in port?
Yep.
Did they treat it more like it was a garrison force?
I wouldn't go that far.
Okay. Well, remember during the interwar period when we were technically a garrison force, we were at sea all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Al Nofi made that comment to me when he was on his fleet problems book when I was reading it, and we were talking about it. He said, "Oh yeah, they went to sea just constantly. We were constantly going to sea. We just didn't stay there. We didn't go other than the Asiatic station. We didn't patrol places. We would go to sea, do our business, have exercise, etc. Go to sea for 2 weeks and then come back and go back to shore. And that's pretty much what the high seas fleet did, or as I prefer to think of it, the German North Sea fleet, because that's really the only place it really operated. So,
and that's why you're hearing this continuing debate on forward deployment, because it comes at a cost.
Yeah.
In terms of people and material. And, that philosophy has really come back to bite us a couple of times. Not so much with the Ticonderoga class, or the Bunker Hill class, I guess is probably the better phrase. Because they're old now.
Mm-hmm.
Old ships tend to be cranky ships.
Yeah. And they could be cranky from the very beginning. Or at least I think the sprue cans were a little cranky based upon stuff I've heard.
They were, because they were really built pretty quickly. But once we got the teething problems taken care of, they were relatively reliable.
Did we ever fix the toilets?
No. Until you stop maintaining them.
Yeah.
Which we did. And, you can ride a ship very hard, but if you don't maintain it, it's not going to last.
Okay, so here's an interesting question. It's kind of off topic. Can the U.S. take on China if a shooting war breaks out? I know this is off topic, but I would really like to know. You have any thoughts on that? I've got a few thoughts on that.
It depends on what China's goals are.
That's my first thought. My second thought is it depends upon where we're fighting. Now, realistically,
which is driven by the first question.
Yes. I've often said, hey, we should challenge China to the best 2 out of 3. We'll fight one in their backyard. We'll fight one off the coast of San Diego, and we'll fight one in the middle of the Pacific, say around Hawaii. And I can guarantee you we win 2 out of 3. We might win 3 out of 3, but we certainly win 2 out of 3. So it depends a lot. It depends a lot also on how much warning we have. And it depends a lot on what our goals are. So China's a tough nut to crack, because under any realistic scenario, keep in mind, not speaking for any of my employers, under any sort of realistic scenario, it's kind of unlikely that we would do it any place except their backyard. I mean, the farthest away from China I could see us fighting them is like around Japan. And maybe the Indian Ocean, maybe the Indian Ocean.
There may be some scragglers that need to be picked up.
Yeah. So it's an away game for us. It's a home game for them. And that's one of the things I always used to say anytime somebody would say, you don't hear this nearly as much anymore, but I remember back in the 90s, people would say, why do we need a new fighter? The F-15 is good enough. To which my response is, I don't want good enough for away games. I want every fighter match. I want every matchup that the U.S. Air Force has to deal with to be the equivalent of clubbing baby seals. I don't want anything. I don't want to be in a situation where the hardware is equal and we have to win on training. I want it to be like clubbing baby seals, because we're going to be fighting away games. And that's all part of the. I always describe it whenever anybody says, why are we the world's policemen? The answer is because the international agreement that we have with the rest of the world in the post-war era is that we're the world's policemen, and in exchange for everybody else letting us be the world's policemen, they all get to take, we get to have economic dominance, and everybody gets to get really, really rich out of that deal. Right. And so the fact that not all of the Western powers fully pull their weight is on the one hand regrettable, but on the other hand actually works to our advantage to some degree. NATO can't do anything without us having a say in it, right? They just don't have the command and control. They don't have the logistics to really do anything. So,
and they tried that twice,
and it's hard.
Yep, and in both cases we had to come in.
And it's always, you know, whenever anybody starts saying stuff, it's like, do we really want a French carrier battle group in the Persian Gulf with an independent French foreign policy? But, and so, you know, I say that in a very, very cynical way, right? Or at least let me rephrase it. It sounds a lot more cynical than I intend it to be. It's really a win-win. People wouldn't go along with that if that wasn't a win-win. It's a win for everybody, unless you're Chinese or Russian. In which case, yeah, it's hard for them to see it necessarily as a win. But I should go through. I do have a couple of slides. Let me go through them real quick, just to. They're all admin. The first one is, and let me foot stomp on this. Starting at the beginning of August, this show is only going to be on the Ares Studio channel. Now, we might add a Starfleet Tactical channel as a separate channel or something else, but it's not going to be on Axanar anymore. And that's because we're basically clearing the battle space so that as it gets closer and closer to the Axanar movie, the release of the Axanar movie, so that channel can be just reserved for the Axanar movie. We're sort of cleaning up our approach to things like that. And this is something that Alec and Stogie want to do. So Stogie's the guy who sort of, you know, pays attention to the algorithm and does a lot of the admin behind the scenes and stuff like that. I think he's been on the show once a long, long time ago. But so, you know, that's what they want to do to make it all work, and roger that. So that's what we're doing. Second of all, we're having a show today. We're probably having a show next week. There's a possibility we won't. The week after that is definitely a no. And then a yes. So there's a couple of no's in there. Like the 29th of July, I will be... the 29th of July, I will... Let's see what's going on the 29th. The 29th is the day I'm going to drive to Des Moines. And so I try not to do a show on the day I drive because it's a long day and there's always the possibility that some suicidal deer or something will make it a longer day. And so I try not to schedule things for a day that I know is going to be a long and exhausting day to begin with. And usually I'm okay on a drive to Des Moines, but you know, something can happen. And then on the 5th of August is my 40th high school reunion. So I will be with my classmates. So that's the, let's see, next slide is. So Dabare Snake Launcher, or I'm sorry, Dabare Snake Launcher, I can never get the name right, is eligible for the Dragon Awards. So, you know, if you like the book, I encourage you to read the book. And if you like the book, I encourage you to nominate it. And it'll help Joelle out. Joelle's a wonderful person. I'm hoping to have her on the show. In fact, I'm very heartened by the fact that she and her husband, Andy, are finally going to put in the sort of soundproof room in their basement so that they can do podcast type stuff and come on the show and do things like that. So I'm expecting that Andy will start coming on the show on a, you know, semi-regular basis. As it is right now, the way their house is set up is that there's no place in the house that he could do something like, either one of them could do something like coming on the show that wouldn't wake up sleeping children if we did it at this time of night. And so there's just, the house just isn't, the house conducts sound very well. So they're putting in a soundproof area and hopefully they'll be able to come on board. But in the meantime, read the book and nominate it. And then the last thing is, tonight's a question and answer show. There's a lot of topics I'm going to work on going through in the future. That's just a subset of all the different stuff. In fact, right now, I've got so many notes on things I want to do on the show that I'm having a hard time sort of pulling them all together. But I'm working on pulling them all together. So And that's pretty much it for those slides. So let's see. I'm looking to see for questions. Okay. So TJ said that he had a question, but it never came through. I think he said that he was going to repost it from Discord. I haven't checked Discord yet today because I've been out running around. So TJ, if you want an answer to that, please go ahead and post it. So, let's see. I'm trying to think of. So I went to the Origins Origins Game Fair today, which is taking place in Columbus. It's about an hour drive away from here. And I saw 3 out of the 4 people I went there to see because I forgot the 4th one was even there until I got back. But one of the things I did while I was there is I saw a very interesting discussion from the guy who was General Barry McCaffrey's artillery commander during Desert Storm. And he was going through all the different things they did from an artillery standpoint. And it was interesting because the subject of, anybody who's watched the show for a while knows that I get all what's the word? All excited when people start talking about doctrine. And it was a very interesting crowd in that he was talking about doctrine and I asked a doctrine question and everybody else followed up with their own doctrine questions. So I could tell it seemed to be pretty much a room full of professionals, or at least former professionals in that regard. And he was talking about some of the interesting places where they like modified the doctrine. Like at one point, he and like his top people were all out in Humvees. They were out in 3 Humvees out way forward to call in artillery strikes. And at one point, like this helicopter starts flying towards them. And it's like, they're looking around. It's like, yeah, we got sidearms. And luckily it turned out to be one of our helicopters. But they were going like, maybe in the future we should like bring a Stinger or something with us. They also talked about how much ammo they were going through and how hard it was. That was the single biggest challenge, was keeping fuel and ammo to the artillery units. And that on at least one occasion, an artillery commander for a particular artillery unit said to his people, like, okay, you just keep setting up and getting ready. I'll go find the ammo convoy. And so he and a couple of their guys got in a Humvee and went and found the ammo convoy and then brought it forward and got it forward. Like they arrived like a half hour before they were supposed to execute a bunch of fire missions. And they weren't really sure. They were afraid they were going to have to call up and say, yeah, we can't execute those missions because we just don't have any ammo. So that's actually a very interesting thing. We never see in Star Trek anything that really looks like logistics support as a general rule. We get a few implications that maybe it could happen. And you can make an argument that maybe logistics support doesn't make sense in terms of, the capabilities of replicators, et cetera, mean that logistics support is a much different thing than we would think of it. But how much logistics support does the submarine force get outside of just coming back to its home port?
There's been demonstrations. I think the Marine Corps just did one with one of the SSGNs.
What'd they do?
Helicoptered out supplies, but usually you don't get anything. You leave your. I left Holy Lock after we did a refit. Provisioned, got spare parts. Make sure we got everything we need to go. We went out and we didn't talk to anybody for 77 days.
You didn't talk to anybody for 77 days?
Nope. We didn't transmit once.
I can believe that. I can believe that. But that's certainly how boomers do things. I think SSNs transmit more than they used to, although I suspect that's going to start going in the other direction again.
It all depends because, they've got link 16 now on a lot of SSNs. So the problem with data links is you have to come up, link up, network in, and that means there's a mast hanging outside. Fortunately, link 16 is really largely satellite communications now.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a line of sight variant, but I think the vast majority of folks use, because the formations are so dispersed, they use satellite navigation or satellite communications.
When I first started going to sea, now my going to sea time was from November 1999 to November 2004. So there was about a 5-year period where I went to sea, 87 days at sea, half on carriers, half on small boys. The first time I went to sea aboard John C. Stennis back in November of 99, they were sending text messages, not text. They were doing WeCan, I think it was called. It was a website that you'd log on to the website and you'd send messages back and forth through that. They then went to something that looked more like regular chat. And when I first went on board, or that first exercise, they're doing a lot of stuff on the radio. They're calling out, when they're setting up water space, they're calling out the points on the, just like I'm sure you learned how to do. They're doing all that stuff verbally over the radio. And they would send it, they might email it on the side or they might post it on the side, but they were still calling it out. By the time I finished 5 years later, they weren't even getting on the radio. It went from, we're going to do everything on the radio because doctrine says do it on the radio and that you can't give orders over chat, to you can give orders over chat and we'll talk on the radio and we'll say, we're going to do things in accordance with the message we just sent you on chat. And then by the last exercise I did, they really just weren't talking on the radio. All their comms were through chat. It's like, oh, the submarine's up. And they'd chat back and forth, etc.
I posted the link that TJ was trying to show in the private chat, Chris.
Yeah, I saw it and I just hadn't gotten to it yet. Okay, so let's see if I can.
I have a little show and tell while you're doing something.
Okay.
Let's get this over in here. That is a submarine pressure hull section. It's from my boat. That's about 2 inches. HY80 steel. That's 2,000 feet. Deeper than that, this breaks.
So was that something that came about after the boat was decommed, or was that something that was like when they were fabricating it?
No, that was decommissioning. Most of the boat was scrapped, but I think it's like 2 or 3 frames forward and after the reactor compartment. They didn't disperse that metal, so they were in a pile over in Puget Sound. And a friend of mine, because they had signs, this is the Lafayette. A friend of mine grabbed one for me.
That's cool.
So, yeah, that's when I tell people that came forward of the reactor compartment, they typically drop it. So I tell them that before I hand it to them, because a 2-inch cube of HY80 will break bones.
It's got some sharp corners on it too.
Yes. So it might even just cut them off.
Yeah.
But, put that into the concept of a 5-inch thick carbon fiber pressure hull that wasn't even rated. It was rated for a little bit deeper than my boat, but not by much.
Yeah, and the other thing, I mean, carbon fiber gets stress fractures, and one of the things I haven't heard anybody talk about is carbon fiber. I don't think performs very well in the cold.
No, it can delaminate in cold.
And I don't know. So I know that's what SpaceX was, one of the reasons why SpaceX said that they weren't going to use it, and for that that basically they would have, because of their concerns about the cold that it was going to have to contain, they were going to have to make it so thick that a big chunk of the weight savings was just going to go away. Plus, there's just other issues with it. Now they're talking about like liquid methane cold, liquid oxygen cold,
right?
As opposed to bottom of the sea cold. I don't have a good feel from the perspective of carbon fiber. Does carbon fiber think bottom of the sea is cold, or does it not think it's cold? I just don't know.
It does. It's not in the same league as, say, cryogenic fuel. But here's the thing. I don't think those tanks are pressurized to the pressure that you would be getting on this thing. Okay. Every 33 feet is 1 atmosphere. Okay. That's 14.7 pounds per square inch. So if you're going down, 4,000 meters, okay, 14,000 feet, you're talking several thousands of pounds of compressive stress. I'm not sure the load is anywhere near equal with a SpaceX fuel tank.
Oh, I'm sure it's not. Although on the flip side, you're not accelerating it at that same speed, and you're not putting the same stresses as you would as going through the atmosphere, but
it's also a different stress, because what you're talking about is dynamic. This is static.
Yeah.
And it's constant.
Yeah, the more I read about this guy, the CEO and mover and shaker behind it, the more I don't want to say dodgy, the more I think that that wasn't the right approach. So, okay. So Wilhelm asks the question, why doesn't Star Trek have dedicated hackers on board the ships? And I'm not sure that's a good question. I think
something utopian future that's below us.
Yeah. I think when push comes to shove, you just don't see a whole lot of computer system vulnerabilities along those lines. And I don't know whether that's just magic or whether that's, I don't know what their thinking is on that. Actually, I do know what their thinking is. I can guarantee you that at some point that if they thought that there was a lot of drama there, they'd probably go with that. But I don't think they think there's drama there.
Besides,
to add into that real quick, I feel like a lot of that's also because a lot of Star Trek happened before like massive breaches of infrastructure occurred.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
Because now, obviously, like, wars have shifted. We are fighting wars on a cyber front now a hell of a lot more than we were back in the 80s and the 90s. So
I can neither confirm nor deny the existence of hackers.
But like, I think a lot of it has to do with most of the Trek shows predate any of those big hacking events. I'm sure going forward, we will see more of that. And they do kind of touch on that with the Borg to a degree. But Nothing beyond that. Potentially in future Star Trek shows, we will see more of that. But because of when these shows were made and what the concerns were at the time, you're not going to see that.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, you're right. We do see it with the Borg.
And the reason why you do is because even assimilated, Picard was something you could understand. So let's look at the Klingon language, Klingon math, and Klingon coding. All right, that sounds like that would be a pretty high bar to play with.
Although I would think that by now we'd have a handle on the Klingons.
Yeah, I'm just saying, but pick Cardassians, pick Romulans,
Yeah, it's always amazing. I mean, I do a talk, I can't remember if I've done it on Starfleet Tactical, called What the U.S. Navy Taught Me About Starfleet. And there are no recorded instances of a U.S. Navy carrier battle group discovering a country that we had never heard of before, right? We know what the enemy looks like. The enemy might surprise us here and there. There might be a war reserve mode or something like that we don't know about. But as a general rule, we know what the enemy, we know what we're going to do dealing with. We know what a jet engine looks like. Every now and then we might be surprised. Usually we're surprised to discover that something the Russians did isn't as good as we feared it might be. It's very rare that it goes the other way. But in Star Trek, they're constantly discovering things where it's like, they're having to figure out things on the fly that we literally have entire buildings full of people who spend years figuring out all the little details. And Spock can just sort of look in that visor, look in that thing, and it'll tell him everything he needs to know about the ship that they're dealing with. Let's see. Let me pull up this thing that TJ was sending. Let's see. Share screen. Okay. Are you guys all seeing this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. There we go. Let me turn that off. So this is, it looks like it's a modern version of.
Looks like a predecessor to the Akira.
Yeah, it looks like an Akira predecessor. Okay, that's not the one I wanted. I wanted to go this way, actually. Is that working? Is it scrolling down?
Yeah.
Scrolling down. Yeah, that's looking like an Akira predecessor. Now, TJ, was there a specific question associated with this? I kind of like it. It looks kind of nifty. Oh, that's an interesting structure at the end there. Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop that. Yeah, he says it's a TMP Akira. Oh, I just wanted to hear your thoughts on it. I kind of liked it. The one problem I have with the Akira is they have these big sort of the structure going forward on either side of the bridge. I've never liked the silhouette view of the Akira. I've always thought it looked kind of weird from the side. And I don't think that the claim is the structures are there to protect the bridge. But the way I look at it is if somebody's going through somebody's penetrating your shields, it really doesn't matter how much hole you have in the way. You're having problems. So, okay. Mark Blanton asked the question, how would Section 31 Starfleet intelligence factor into forming your dossier and what other powers are doing? Would there be a classified feed that the captains receive? So first of all, I think I would differentiate between Section 31, which seems to be more about dirty tricks, and Starfleet Intelligence, which seems to be more about data collection and analysis. There are some agencies out there in the real world that combine those two functions, but as a general rule, like, you know, I was an intel analyst. I wasn't a dirty tricks guy. You wouldn't want to have me go play James Bond. I would be really, really, really bad at it. And so, you know, I got reports from people, and I wrote reports on I got reports from different agencies, and I wrote reports on putting it all together. I would
say if Section 31 wanted somebody to know something, they would filter it through Starfleet Intelligence.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that captains would receive a classified feed. That's kind of how it works in the real world. You also get in, sometimes you've got something called P4s, which a personal four, so it goes to a captain, that it might explain like, okay, you got orders that said such and such. Let me give you some of the background. And sometimes that's politically sensitive stuff. Like, the reason why we canceled your port call is because there's some nasty internal politics taking place in that particular country, and we think that sending a U.S. Navy ship there is just going to make the situation worse. But you know, we don't want to put that in a situation where it could get out, because telling the sailors something like that is the same thing as taking out a full-page ad in the New York Times, for all practical purposes. Would you disagree with that, Chris?
No. See, but then again, being on a submarine, you don't have any communication. So, you know, I think, you know, if you deploy, just turn off your cell phone, put it away. You can't play.
You know what they do? You know what the first thing an aircraft carrier does if they get a report that one of their planes has gone down? They shut off their internet connectivity. They set Condition River City is what it's called. And so like we lost a plane off of, I think it was off of Vincent. It might have been off of Stennis the second time I was on Stennis. It was one of those two. It was either the second time I was on Vincent or the second time I was on Stennis. And all of a sudden we get this, you know, they come over the 1MC and say, set Condition River City throughout the ship. And that means everybody who's got a switch needs to flip their switch. And that was the first indication that the crew had that there was a problem. Now, as it turns out, they fished the crew out of the water. Everybody lived. But they don't want it to be a situation where, like, family members find out that an airplane has gone down from some random email that got sent by somebody, you know, sent by somebody off the ship to his girlfriend and then got forwarded around. That's not how they want that to happen.
No.
So there's also, I forget what it's called, but there's an admiral to admiral equivalent of P4s. It's called something else. And one of my instructors up in Newport, when he was a lieutenant commander on the staff at Navior, he got called upon to write one of those. And it was going to, I believe, Admiral Zumwalt? No. Submariner who was 6th Fleet at during the time of, like, El Dorado Canyon.
It wasn't Crow, was it?
No, it was, I think he later became CNO. Kelso. Kelso. And apparently there was a lot of frustration on the staff about how things were being handled on Kelso's staff. And so there was this admiral to admiral comm that went out, and Doug, when he was writing it, he knew that this thing was going to go through like 4 or 5 levels of review before it even got to his admiral. And so he expressed the frustration that the entire staff was feeling by starting out the memo with, stop thinking like a bubblehead and start thinking like 6th Fleet. That is the only sentence that he wrote that made it into the final. He wrote it knowing that it would be cut out.
Never assume those things.
Well, apparently it caught the spirit of the moment.
I'm sure.
And it's also important to understand for those who don't, like TV shows like Star Trek are very personal related, right? You're dealing with individual personalities, and yeah, there's a bunch of that going on, but when a lot of the times you're dealing with the staff. So when the admiral staff gets on the radio, it's usually a lieutenant or somebody lower rank than a lieutenant, right? It's not generally the admiral. And you actually see this in Battlestar Galactica. Every time Adama gets on, he says, "This is Galactica Actual," right? Anytime you hear the word actual, you're talking to the guy, you're not talking to his staff. And so, if it's a ship, like if Kirk were doing this, it would be, "This is Enterprise Actual," as opposed to, "This is USS Enterprise." That was one of the things that was kind of weird, is understanding that when that people represented their command, which may or may not be a ship, but they represented their command and they were referred to it as their command. Do you know? You probably do. We've probably talked about this. If Sixth Fleet shows up, if Commander Sixth Fleet shows up and he gets piped on board, he gets piped on board as
Sixth Fleet.
Yeah, Sixth Fleet arriving. What if it's the president?
Never had that one. What, United States?
United States arriving.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know anybody who's had the president show up, but United States arriving. So somebody was telling me just the other day about some time when somebody was coming on board and they did the wrong number of dings, and everybody thought that it was like a 4-star coming on board just because of the number of dings. Yeah. And everybody was like spinning up into the overhead until it's like, no. Inexperienced guy, screwed up.
Belay my last.
Yeah, I'm sorry, what?
Belay my last.
Yeah, belay my last. So you generally don't hear the admiral or his staff get on the radio very much at all. Usually they do all their talking in the meeting earlier in the day, and they tell the various warfare commanders what they want to have happen. And I did see one time where an admiral got on the radio and was arguing a call with the White Cell ashore. So the 2-star, I think he was a 2-star. He might have only been a 1-star. And I'm trying to remember his name. Barry something. He was my nomination for admiral most likely to be played by Fred Thompson in the movie. Because he was just like Fred Thompson's character in Hunt for Red October. And he was arguing with this lieutenant about the call. And of course, the lieutenant said, "Whatever you say, Admiral, whatever you say." Immediately caved and let the admiral have his way about something. But
check completed satisfactorily.
Yeah, yes. That's the only time I ever experienced actual who was an admiral on the radio. That was aboard USS Constellation. And there were a couple of times when the staff would get on the radio, but it was only once did they get on board to actually exercise command by negation and say, "No, don't do what you're, belay that last, do this instead." Usually it was, "You were supposed to give me a report 5 minutes ago. Where's your report?" Because you'd still have to get on you'd have to make a radio call specifically to, calling out, Bravo, this is Bravo Zulu, this is my 1630 report, and then you'd give the report. And they'd forget to do that. There was one crew that got spanked 3 times during the time I was on board for that. They had some other issues too. So, but let's see. I'm trying to think of what, any other questions here? Let me scroll back and see if there was something else. Okay, dedicated hacker. Yeah, Rob Davidoff comments that the question of logistics in the future is an interesting moving topic. Some stuff like additive manufacturing is pretty limited today, but on the other hand, a lot of it is basically only evolved in the last 15 to 20 years. Yeah, and one of the things, if you read the Star Trek Next Gen Tech Manual, they talk about how there are basically ports on the back of the spine of the Galaxy class, that the idea is that when they come into port, into a starbase, there's umbilicals that mate there that just basically refill all the various types of matter. They don't necessarily carry parts. What they carry is the types of raw materials that can be easily replicated into parts. And so, organics is different than inorganics, etc. The closer you are to the final assembly, the less energy it takes to do that. And so they basically give them the stuff that they need in order to make that work. But we never see anything like that. That's just something that they describe. You never really see it. So TJ commented that one of the SSNs did a resupply off of one of the subtenders in an Australian port. How many subtenders do we have left, Chris?
See, Guam, Hawaii. I think we still have one in Japan.
That's more than
I'm going to say about 4.
That's more than I thought we had.
But I have been keeping track of tenders. I'll be honest.
So the Australians going with a nuclear option, and the infrastructure that goes along with it. My first thought was, this only works if we base a submarine there, and we basically have we co-locate a submarine and share the load with that, because the port infrastructure to make that work strikes me as being, that's a lot of stuff. And we can take advantage of forward basing a submarine in Australia.
To answer your question, there's 2, MRES Land and Cable.
And they're both
older than the hill.
Yeah, they're both sailing ships, aren't they?
No, not quite.
Steam plants?
Yes.
Is there anything else in the U.S. Navy other than the nukes that have steam plants?
I
think all the steam plants on the oilers with steam plants, they've all gone away, right?
Yeah. Did we ever go down that heat recovery unit on the the 2500 gas turbines?
I haven't heard of anything like that.
Because they were looking at doing a steam recovery of the exhaust gas to make steam. And I don't know if they went forward with it because it was being a pain in the butt.
Well, if they did, would they use that steam for propulsion, or would they just use it to make hot water?
Not sure what they were planning to use. It would be pretty warm.
So they used steam off of on Connie. They used steam. They piped steam around the ship for wherever they needed hot water, like so in the showers, and they had a heat exchanger in the shower. There was at least one incident that occurred when one of the guys I knew at CNA, when he was a field rep on board Connie, where there was corrosion in that, and when the young sailor turned on the shower that morning, he got steam.
That'll do it.
Yeah, that was not good. That was not good. I don't think he survived the experience.
That is definitely not good.
TJ says the command ships are steam powered. Wright asks if the LPDs are. I'm not sure that there's any LPDs left that are steam powered at this point. But I could be wrong. I think they're all diesels. So Rob does not speak for any employer, but it looks like there are some stationary shore side power gen plants with integrated steam turbines for additional power gen. No clue if used in marine. I should ask Peter Gold that question because he might know, being a marine engineer, a maritime engineer. Wilhelm asked the question. Oh, Rob says there's stationary LM 2500 plants.
Yeah, so that's the racer modification.
Yeah, I don't even know about that. So let's see. Wilhelm asks, will we ever see battle group style formations in Star Trek for exploration? No, I don't think so in Star Trek proper. I've been toying around with some stuff. Andy Presby and Pat Doyle and I periodically talk about and just putting up the hood and sort of doing something that I call the alternate Star Trek technical background or the alternate Starfleet technical background. That just basically changes the technology a little bit here and there. And there's some operational stuff that would go with it as well. And I could see a situation where it's not really like a battle group so much as you send out like one ship that sort of functions as the hub, and then you have spokes going out to look at the adjoining star systems, and then you move that forward as need be. And I could see a situation where you where you basically you have a ship that's building star bases that comes along behind and like builds a star base there, and that's how you extend things out. I've got a few notes on how that would work, but I haven't really sort of pulled it all together.
I think they should do the same thing that they did in Empire Strikes Back. Star Destroyers deployed a bunch of drones.
Yeah, that makes sense too. Or long-range shuttles or something like that.
I think drones work really well. I don't have to worry about environmentals.
I believe that I want to say that in Voyager, we saw something. Wasn't there an unmanned ship in Voyager that they encountered at one point? An unmanned Federation starship that was a long-distance explorer?
Well, you mean Prometheus?
I can't remember if it had a name, but it was an unmanned ship.
Yeah, I don't. Well, it wasn't the Nova frigate because that had crew on it.
No, it wasn't. That was that little one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't that. This was something else.
I think it was Prometheus.
Rob Davidoff says, I think you may mean Dauntless. I don't know. It could be Prometheus, Dauntless, something. But
the only other thing that was out there was that thing that that large seeking missile that the Cardassians fired that ended up in the Voyager series.
Large seeking missile.
B'Elanna reprogrammed it, and I think it was Dreadnought, I think is what it was called.
Okay. Yeah.
TJ says it was Dreadnought.
Yeah. To be honest, I've got some holes in my Star Trek Voyager knowledge. I mean, I saw pretty much everything in Next Gen. And I think almost everything in Enterprise and almost everything in Deep Space Nine, but I got some holes in Voyager. So let's see. Rob Davidoff says, which was an alien fake. There was also the Cardassian missile, the Dreadnought. which the Maquis had stolen and repurposed.
Yeah, B'Elanna reprogrammed it.
Yeah. So, oh well. Let's see. Let me see if there's anything else that comes up. I'm going back to see if there's any other questions. I think we're all caught up on questions. So if anybody's got any last minute questions, now's the time to send them in, because I think we're actually at the point where it probably makes sense to call it a night. Okay. All right, then. Let's go ahead and call it then. Thank you very much for coming on, Kress.
No problem.
For everybody else, I'm going to try to do my that prefect brief I keep talking about doing. I've been listening to old episodes again to sort of get back in the swing of things. And I think I first mentioned it like a year ago. It's been a weird year, and but I'm going to try to do that for next week. We'll see if that ends up happening, because this coming week could be kind of weird. There's a lot of stuff going on at work. We'll see how many cycles I have when I get home each night. But thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you next week. And don't forget, read Joelle's book and think about giving it a nomination for DragonCon. Thank you very much, everybody. Goodbye.